All right, good morning, everybody. Today we're doing lecture 18, the 4 different types of variation. We're going to be looking at the 4 types of variation, and then we're going to be learning about how to find the constant of variation, k, and then how to use that to solve a couple of the problems. So there are 4 different types of variation. They are direct variation, when you write direct variation, you're going to have y equals k times x. So when we write this one down, we say that y varies directly. Y varies directly as x. Now for direct variation, notice that k is just going to be a number. We can also call that a constant. It's called the constant of variation. So if k is a number, that means that x and y are both going to be variables. So x is going to be a variable and y is going to be a variable. K is always going to be a constant or just a number. All right, let's look at the next one. Inverse. So for inverse variation, you're not going to be multiplying by x. You're going to be dividing by x. So here's what it's going to look like. You're going to have y equals k divided by x. K is going to be the constant of variation, like usual, but x and y are going to be variables. And when we want to write this out in words, we say that y varies inversely. Inversely, right? Because we're dividing. Y varies inversely as x. So those are the 2 types of variation that you learned in Algebra 1. And then for Algebra 2, we just add 2 different types that you haven't learned yet. And those are joint and combined. So let's talk about joint variation next. Joint variation. So for this type of variation, you're always going to be multiplying. But instead of having just an x and a y, we're going to add a third variable, the z. So we're going to have k times x times z. And whenever I write my z's, I'm going to put a line through it, just so you don't confuse it with a 2. So when we write this out in words, we say y varies jointly. Y varies jointly as x and z. So now we're adding the variable z to the mix. And then the last type of variation that we learn is combined. Combined variation. So when we're talking about combined variation, we're really thinking about combinations of the 3 types of variation that we've already talked about. So typically in a combined variation, you'll see direct and inverse, or you might see joint and inverse. For this, it could be anything, but for the formula, we're going to write k times x because y is going to vary directly as x, but we're also going to say we can divide by z. And that means y is going to vary inversely as z. So you can combine two different types of variation and get a completely different equation from the one that you started off with. So those are the four different types of variation. And the problems that we're going to look at today are going to ask you to write an equation. They're going to ask you to write an equation. So you're going to choose from these four that we just talked about. And you're just going to switch the variables around. Another question that they might ask you is find out what k is. And k is just going to be a number, right? The constant of variation. The third type of question that they might ask you is, once you found k, solve for a missing variable. And we're going to look at that at the very end. Okay. So I want to take a look at the problem set first. The problem set. This is going to contain all three different types of questions that I'm going to talk about today. So looking at number 3, part A, what I want to do is I want to write an equation. That's the first thing that I want to be able to do. Take a sentence and then write it out as an equation or a formula. So the first one says x varies directly. So x varies directly with a. For this one, notice that we're talking about direct variation. And typically in the problem, it'll tell you which type of variation you're going to be using. So for this one, I'm going to choose the direct variation. When we're talking about direct variation, we're multiplying. We're going to multiply k times a. And then since it says x varies, we're going to have x on the other side. So looking at this equation right here, we have x equals k times a. That means that x is varying directly with a. So k is always going to be a part of every single equation that we write. All right, let's try 3b. This one says y varies inversely as in. Y varies inversely as in. So for this one, we have two different variables. We have a y and an n. Since y is varying inversely, we're going to be dividing, because that's what inverse means. We're going to be dividing. Since it says y varies, we're going to start off by saying y equals, and we're going to divide by the variable. So we're really going to be dividing by n. K is going to be at the top of the fraction, and n is going to show up at the bottom. So that's what an inverse variation is going to look like. We're always going to be dividing when we're talking about inverse variation. So now let's try a couple of problems where we need to figure out what k is. And that's going to require knowing two different numbers. So let's take a look at number 4, part A. This one says, let y vary directly as x. Let y vary directly as x. We're going to let y equal 4. And we're going to let x equal 2. So the first sentence that it gives you, it's going to tell you what type of equation you're going to write. And since we're talking about direct variation, we're going to be multiplying k by x. So when we write down our equation, I'm going to say y equals k times x. Once you write your equation down, you're going to plug in the two numbers that it gives you. And it tells you that y is going to be equal to 4 and x is going to be equal to 2. So those are the two numbers that we're going to be plugging in. Those are going to be the variables. So I'm going to let y be 4. I don't know what k is yet, so I'm going to leave it as k. And then inside parentheses, I'm going to have my x. In this case, it's going to be 2. So now I've got 4 equals k times 2. How do I get k by itself? Since I'm multiplying both sides by 2, I need to do the opposite to both sides. I need to divide both sides by 2. So I'm going to divide by 2 on the left side, and I'm going to divide by 2 on the right side. Over here, the 2's are going to cancel out, so I can cross those out. And I'm only going to be left with a k on this side. That's what I want. On the other side, I'm going to have 4 divided by 2, and that's going to be 2. So this is going to be our answer, 2. Once you have the two numbers for x and y, you can easily figure out what k is going to be. You just need to find some way to get k by itself on the right side. Okay, we're going to try 4 part B together. Now for 4b, it's going to say let q vary inversely as x. So we're going to let q vary inversely as x. So this means we're going to have inverse variation. That means we're going to be dividing by x. And we're going to let x equal 2. And we're going to let q be 8. So when we do inverse variation, that means we're going to be dividing by x. So when we write our equation, we're going to have q equals k divided by x. So that's the first thing we do. We write out our equation. And then we're going to plug in the two numbers that it gives us. It tells us that q equals 8. And it tells us that x is going to be 2. Since we don't know what k is yet, we're going to leave that as k. And now what I want to do is I want to get k by itself on the right side. So what I need to do is I need to multiply both sides by 2. So I put the 2 in parentheses. What that's going to do is it's going to cancel out the 2's on the right-hand side, leaving me with just a k. On the other side, I'm going to have 2 times 8, and that's going to give me 16. So that's going to be my k value, my constant of proportionality. So a few of the questions are going to ask you to find k or write an equation. And then the third type of question is going to ask you to solve for the missing variable. And that's what we're going to do on the next slide. So the next one we're going to do is number 2. So let's take a look at that. 2 says, if P varies directly with Q, so that gives you the equation, right? We're going to say P equals 32 when Q is equal to 2. And then it's going to say find Q when P equals 80. So the first thing we're going to do with this problem is we're going to write down our equation. And it's going to tell you that in the first sentence. So if it says P varies directly, remember directly means we're multiplying. We're going to be multiplying K by Q. So it's going to look like this. P equals K times Q. So we write down our equation, and then we start plugging in the numbers that it gives us. It tells us that P is equal to 32. Q is equal to 2. So those are the first 2 numbers that we're going to plug in. So I'm going to let P be 32. The K is going to remain a K for now. And Q is going to be 2. I'll put that in parentheses. So now we have enough information to figure out what K is, our constant. But what I need to do to both sides to get K by itself is to divide both sides by 2. So when I divide both sides by 2, notice that the 2's are going to cancel out on the right side. And I'm left with K equals 32 divided by 2. That's going to give me 16. And I'm going to circle that number. That's going to be my K value. But then it gives us one more piece of information to consider. It tells us to find Q when P equals 80. That's the next number that we're going to plug in. So what I'm going to do is on the right side, I'm going to carry over the equation that we just wrote down, that P equals K times Q. But instead of having a K there, I know that K is going to be equal to 16. We just found that. So I'm going to plug in 16 for K. So I get P is equal to 16 times Q. So plugging in my K value, I only need one more number to find the missing variable. Now it tells me that P is going to be equal to 80. So I'm going to let P be 80. And it doesn't tell me what Q is, right? We're going to have to solve for that. How can I get Q by itself now? Since I'm multiplying it by 16, I need to do the opposite. I'm going to divide both sides by 16. So on both sides, we divide by 16. The 16s are going to cancel out, leaving me with Q equals 80 divided by 16. That's going to be 5. So this is called solving for the missing variable. Solving for the missing variable. And in this case, the missing variable is going to be Q. So now what I want you to do is try the classwork. I made a video yesterday about it. So you can look at number 11, 12, and 13 on the classwork in that video that I made. Okay? So the two things that are going to be due on Sunday, you're going to have the variation classwork, and you're going to have the variation quiz. And for both of these assignments, it'll give you the questions, and I want you to actually write down the full questions on your notebook paper, along with your work and your answer for each question. Okay? And that's it. Class dismissed. If you have any questions about today's lecture, or if you have any questions about the classwork or the quiz, go ahead and put them down in the chat box, and I'll get to you very soon. And I'll see everybody on Wednesday.